Redditors who regularly travel around the world in ships or boats, what is something strange or haunting that you have witnessed while out at sea and still cannot explain? I spent 7 years sailing a boat around the Caribbean. I sailed alone 90% of the time. Not too many weird things, to be honest. Whales got too close for comfort a few times. I had auditory hallucinations several times due to sleep deprivation. Downside to sailing solo, that was always a bit scary. Weirdest was sailing between BVI and St. Martin. Moonless night, pitch black, total flat calm, flat seas are rare in that area. The ocean lit up with what I could only assume was some sort of glowing jellyfish. These globes in the water would flash bright green for a second, then vanish. Hundreds of them. And they were not small, several feet in diameter. This lasted for about 30 minutes. It was beautiful and surreal. Never saw anything before or since like it in over 20,000 miles of open ocean sailing. Growing up, my family had a cottage on a small island in the Baltic Sea, off the coast of Sweden. This happened in the late 70s, during the Cold War, when Russian subs were often observed in Swedish territorial waters. Our island did have a military installation on it and was off limits to foreigners. My dad and I were fishing from Grandpa's old wooden rowboat, just drifting along a couple of 100 yards offshore, when all of a sudden the head of a diver slowly rose to the surface a couple of yards off the side of the boat. He slowly turned around, spotted us, and disappeared beneath the water again. We saw divers on several occasions, but never that close, and once we also saw the conning tower of a submarine. I was in a 40-some foot boat in my teens. I know next to nothing about ships, but I commuted by boat almost every day, so I've been on them a fair amount. This was in Lake Superior, where I never knew the waves to be very big, and they would usually cancel the ride if that were the case. One day, we had a single massive wave come out of nowhere and nearly flip us over. It was taller than our boat and wrenched everyone. But I had been looking in the direction where it hit, and there was nothing. Just a momentary 15-foot wall of water which hit us, and the lake was calm again. I was in the middle of the ocean on a sailboat several years ago. It was the middle of the night and I couldn't sleep, so I decided to sit up for a little while. After a couple minutes staring idly at the ocean, I see something a couple 100 feet away. It's drifting closer and closer. When it's finally close enough for me to see what it is, I see it is a life preserver with a tennis shoe stuck to it. I know there was probably an explanation, but it still creeped me to see in the middle of the ocean. On a patrol once in the Delaware, we came across a deflated kid's life ring type toy float about 3 feet below the surface. The river is turbid as fuck, and you couldn't see any further. We grab a boat hook and pull the float closer, and there's a line going out of sight with a bit of weight to it. We stopped and talked a second to brace ourselves for what might be attached to this line. We pulled and it ended up being a bunch of twigs fouled around the line, but got him if we weren't expecting to see a dead kid attached to it. Something similar had happened to one of the other crew before, so he was pretty freaked out by the whole thing and just started laughing when it was just the log. On deployment, observed a fireball in the Indian Ocean, 100% convinced it was a larger meteor, but it remained solid until it disappeared and it abruptly angled like it hit something, albeit at a very shallow angle. When I say fireball, I mean fireball, not a shooting star, like you can see on a typical dark night, not in the city. Edit. To be clear to everyone, I don't think it was an alien visitation or something similar. I really do think it was just a larger meteor. Merchant mariner here. A few times I've been in really dense fog, so dense that I couldn't see the bow of the boat I was on, and it's no fun at all, especially if you're in tight quarters. Radar and GPS are your friends in those situations, but even if you know where you are and that there's nothing around you, there's still something deeply unsettling about being lost in a cold silent mist. Also got to swim one time in 3 miles deep water. That was pretty cool. Was delivering a boat from NC to SV, and we got becalmed mid-ocean, so we went over the side for a swim while holding on to trailing lines and leaving someone on board, of course. Looking down into the water was like looking up into space, that same sensation of infinity, but it was strange to be floating, almost flying, on top of it. The light disappeared into this deep, ultimate blue. Was a watchman on a dinner cruise vessel. Watched as dolphins encircled a school of baitfish, drawing the circle tighter and tighter until they plowed straight through the ball and nailed the fish. Did not understand how sophisticated and murderous dolphins were, or how well they planned their attack. I spent a week on a boat on a river. One day I was kinda zoned out on the deck when something in the corner of my eye caught my attention. I turned around just in time and saw a whale's tail going back into the water. Like the cliché pictures you see of a tail sticking out from the surface. I was sure I saw it. Like 100%. But then I thought about the probability of a whale navigating its way up a river through 3 locks just to do some flips and shit, and chalked it up to my brain making it up somehow. It still confuses me. I've been hunting with my dad in Finland for over 10 years now, and I know the area like the back of my hands. My dad's been hunting there for over 30 years. One night we were heading to an island and suddenly something started blasting water in the middle of the sea. Like there was a rock just beneath the surface and the waves were bouncing from it. We knew for a fact that there wasn't a rock there. It looked weird, so we went to have a closer look, but it was so dark we couldn't tell what the thing splashing was. It looked like it was doings of some animal. My only theory to date is that it was a seal that had been caught in a fishing net, and it had then broke the net and made its way to the open sea and was trying to get to the surface, but couldn't make it. My dad caught this huge arthropod during our time out at sea when we went to go and catch crabs close to a Florida coast. It broke free from the net and swam away. No clue what it was. That, or I interrupted a horseshoe crab orgy. This wasn't on the ocean, but an inland lake, which actually makes the story even weirder. Lake Kagaong is the second biggest lake on the Natauling Island. So begin fact that it actually has its own islands within it. While the lake itself is huge, it's not actually connected to the Great Lakes other than by a river that goes over a waterfall. This means that only small recreational boats capable of being launched off a trailer can enter the lake at the 3 or 4 small launch areas. That being said, one day when my dad and I were out in our 23-foot bow rider, which was one of the bigger boats on the lake, when we spotted a large black ship slowly moving towards one of the islands on the far side of the lake. It wasn't a sailing ship or anything you'd expect a ghost ship to look like. In fact, it looked like a super yacht you'd see in places like Monaco. It disappeared behind the island, which was large enough to hide it entirely. We drove the boat over towards it, but by the time we got over there the mystery vessel was gone. We drove the whole perimeter of the lake and saw no trace of this massive boat. While again the lake is plenty big enough to accommodate a vessel of this size, hell, you could comfortably drive the Titanic around in there. There is no way a boat of that size could have gotten into that lake. There is no navigable waterway connecting the lake to the big water, and the only launch ramps are very small, and even then, that ship was too big to be hauled on a truck. Even if it was, the shorelines are pretty rocky and steep in most places, and there's nowhere to set up the cranes and other necessary equipment required to actually get a vessel of this size into the water. Nobody ever saw the ship again after that. No one else on the lake had ever seen it either, so we never got an explanation. We would sometimes see lights out in the distance at night. I had a few people tell me that some of these lights were so bright that it felt like it was like the sun had come up. I haven't seen a light like that, but I have seen what looked like a plane flying at night. It would change directions and fly the other way. This happened 5 times in the span of about 2 minutes. This is something I cannot explain logically. How can something change directions that fast, at that speed, in that kind of movement? Oddest thing I have ever seen. I've posted this before, so pretty much a CNP. This was an old boat, built in 1926, wood hull. At the time we had it set up for dragging sea scallops. Once in a while we would be out on an overpass trip, and you would be laying in your bunk in the middle of the night listening to the waves lapping against the bow, and all of a sudden you would hear a sharp knocking against the side of the wood hull from the outside. Sometimes from under the boat, sometimes higher up along the sides, but always where it would be at least a couple feet underwater. Sometimes just 1 or 2 sharp knocks, sometimes a flutter like the drumming of fingers on a desk, but very distinct and, dare I say, deliberate. And it would usually come in waves. Like it would happen multiple times over the course of a few minutes, and then not again for the rest of the night. It came up in conversation a few times with some of the other guys, and the only somewhat plausible explanation was that it was actually sea scallops swimming up and bouncing off the bottom of the boat. The theory was that when a scallop bed became overcrowded or otherwise unsuitable, that some of them would swim up into the water column and drift along with the upper current to find new areas to populate, and the sound we heard was their shells hitting the boat as we drifted through a school of them. I have no idea if there's any science to back that up, and it sounds pretty dubious to me, but it's not like I have a better explanation for it. I mean, besides mermaids. When I was in the Navy, I was stationed on a cruiser, and that ship was certainly haunted. More than once I shared a smoke late at night with someone vaguely familiar, but no one knew who I was talking about, and the description didn't match anyone. We never really talked other than mention the quality of the seas at the time. It's a nice night, all looks like a storm is coming, and just watch the horizon or the night sky, a couple times commenting on the constellations that were out. Never anything malevolent, but a little unnerving when I could never find that dude and people thought I was too sleep deprived. I worked on private yachts for 3 years. When out at sea you have to do watches, which means you are in the bridge for a couple hours at a time monitoring all of the systems. Boats run on autopilot and generally only need adjustments to the course every couple of hours or so. So being on watch generally means you're stuck looking at the same expanse of grey water for a couple hours, waiting for something to happen and trying to ignore the fact that you're seasick. If you're a fan of watching paint dry, being on watch is the job for you. It's also important to note that everyone working on a boat carries a radio, and that radio has to be on at all times. Now on this boat I had the 2 to 6 watch. That meant from 2 to 6 am and 2 to 6 pm, I had to be in the bridge. In between watches I would just sleep, on account of being sleep deprived and nauseous 100% of my waking hours. We had just entered into the Bahamas island chain around 11:30 am, so the water had calmed down a bit. I was dead to the world, getting in my final hours of nap time before my watch started up, when my radio crackled to life with the calls of "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday, everyone to the bridge, we have a boat on fire." Now, Mayday is only said over a radio when there could be imminent loss of life or limb. It's the oh shit button of the maritime world, the radio equivalent of SOS. The Titanic is fucking sinking, and we only have half the lifeboats we need. It's a bigger adrenaline rush than cocaine, and within seconds I was out of bed and in the bridge. Sure as shit is brown. There was a 20-foot sailboat about 500 feet in front of us, engulfed in a ball of flames. It went up in about 10 seconds and burned like Australia. So we launched our rescue tender, grabbed the first aid kit, and set out to get as many bodies off that boat as possible. In a miraculous stroke of luck, there was only one person on board, and the only piece of him that sustained injury were his eyebrows. We pulled him out of the water, got him checked over, and brought him with us to our next port. He lost everything except his life, and as we pulled away his boat sank in 800 feet of water. Make no mistake, boats are dangerous. Fiberglass goes up in flames fast, and when you're in the open ocean your chances of survival are slim. He was lucky we were there, because it's not often you get 2 boats in the same place like that. Keep your EPIBs close, and always have a life raft on board. Other than that, I saw the New Year's Eve fireworks off of Richard Branson's island in the BVI's. He puts on a great display every year. The stars are brilliant too. If the whole world shut off the lights for one night you wouldn't believe what you could see. For more funny Askreddit stories, please subscribe and like the video.